in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. We are going to dive pretty quickly into a Ron Paul Liberty Report, deconstructing Russiagate. And with everything that's really been coming out, the Democrats right now are actually feeling pinched. And in the second half, we'll get into another part of what's going on with the Democrats. And this has to do with Donna Brazile. But if we remember, a lot of this started with this whole Russia collusion. Oh, there's all this Russia collusion. We find out later that, well, the Democrats were colluding with the Russians. There was deals being made. Oh, your foundation gets a donation, and all of a sudden, that country's able to, get more uranium. So it's all kind of been flipped on its head. Everything that Democrats were accusing Trump of doing, it seems that they more likely did. It's kind of like saying the person that, who farted? Well, the person that asked that question is usually the person that farted. It kind of goes back to that, where it's really the accuser is actually the one that should be accused of. But we'll get into this Ron Paul Liberty Report. We'll cover some of this when we get out. I want to cover a couple more things, and then we'll get back into the Democratic Party and what's going on with Donna Brazile and all that. So let's go ahead and dive into this Ron Paul Liberty Report, and we'll cover that.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is our co-host, Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Very well. We have a special guest today, and he's a noted veteran foreign affairs journalist, well-known and very thorough. His name is Joe Lauria. Joe, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Dr. Paul, for having me on.
Wonderful. Before we get into a recent article that you've written about Russiagate, which is fascinating, and we'll talk about that, I want to introduce a book here, or show our audience a book. And I hope it doesn't help Hillary Clinton, but we want to show this. It says, How I Lost by Hillary Clinton. But it turns out that I think you had something to do with this book. I think there's a lot of Hillary Clinton involved in this. And there's a foreword by Julian Assange. That's nice. And you have annotated a lot of what Hillary has been saying. So she was explaining this. So it's an interesting take on that. And I just wanted the audience to know about this. So did you have a lot of fun doing this little book?
I did. We did it very quickly. We used the WikiLeaks releases of her emails, of John Podesta's emails. So in that sense, it's by her because it's using her own words and her own associates' words. But I did write about 22,000 words of introduction and annotation to provide the historical and political context.
Yeah, right.
What she indicts herself.
Okay. The article we want to talk a little bit more about today it's called "On the Origins of Russiagate." Who ever believed there could be a Russiagate? But I agree with the title. My little paper here said it was published at Huffington Post, but I don't think it appears on their page right now. But anyway, we did get a copy of this, and you might make mention, if you care to, about why it is not on Huffington Post at this particular time. But the title is "On the Origins of the Russiagate," and this is very, very detailed explanation and understanding of what's been going on. Republicans are involved, Democrats are involved, Trump is involved, Russia's involved. I'm particularly fascinated about the geopolitics of all this, the accusations and the false accusations, and how NATO is involved in a bit, and how things have changed over this period of time. So, Kelly, give us a little introduction about that article, and then we will follow up from there.
Well, the article, I originally published this article on Consortium News last week, the website run by Bob Perry. It was under the title of "The Democratic Money Behind Russiagate." I then updated it with the latest information. The Manafort and Papadopoulos indictments took place after that was published, so I updated it, included also testimony from Comey and earlier testimony from Comey and Clapper in there, and I published it myself on the website Huffington Post as a longtime contributor there. Contributors have the right to post their own articles there. It is then reviewed later by their editors. So it appeared for about 23 hours, and then I was informed that it had been taken down. I was never contacted by anybody at the Huffington Post. There's a kind of newsroom rule that before an article is retracted, the first thing you do is contact the writer, give him a chance to respond and defend his article. And that never happened. And since it was taken down, I've still not heard from anyone at the Huffington Post. There's been no due process whatsoever here. I gave them 2 days to respond afterward. Then I wrote a letter 24 hours ago about now. I still not have heard why they took this article down. They did, however, respond, the Huffington Post, to a reporter at BuzzFeed, their media reporter. And I know this because he posted their response on Twitter. And it said they said that they pulled it because there were factual errors in there and misleading claims. Okay. So I want to know what those are, and in the absence of any statement from them on what these misleading claims are and what the factual errors are, I can only conclude that this was not an editorial decision but a political one. And I rarely use and dislike the word censorship, as I never use fascism. Both are completely overused and misused. But I cannot think of any other word to describe what's happened here but censorship. Right. This was a political piece that ran against the deep faith of many in the Democratic establishment about what happened with Russia and this election. And my article, if you want me to go through it very quickly, I can explain what's in there.
Well, let me just make one comment first, and we'll do that.
Sure.
But I think when they do this to an author and they take it down, the opposite effect, instead of closing out, it makes people more fascinated. It made me think, hey, I have to read this. Why is this so important that certain groups they don't want us to know about it? So, go ahead.
I think you're right. It's probably more attention now to this article because they pulled it than it would have been originally.
Right.
Of course, we think, thankfully, we do have it up on the Ron Paul Institute website, too, so our viewers can go see it there on the front page. And it would be nice to go through the article, but I have to say, I stopped at the first couple of sentences because it hit me. It was so well crafted. It hit me in the face. Essentially, the article starts with the point that both of the sources for the claim that the DNC was hacked by Russia were paid for by the DNC. And if that's not a conflict of interest in itself, that should raise all kinds of red flags, I don't know what is. So take it from there if you can, and just kind of take us through the article. If you can.
Well, that's absolutely right. There are two main sources for the allegation that Russia interfered with the election by hacking the DNC and the John Podesta emails, and then supposedly giving them to WikiLeaks. And the first was the memo written by Christopher Steele, the former MI6 intelligence agent, former head of the Russia desk for MI6 in Britain. And the second source was CrowdStrike. So let me talk about CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is a private company run by Dmitry Alperovitch. He's one of the co-founders. He's also a fellow at the Atlantic Council, very anti-Russian Atlantic Council, and he's an Putin Russian. Why did the DNC hire CrowdStrike? Because they refused to let the FBI examine their servers to determine whether there was, in fact, a hack at all, and then who may have hacked it. So they didn't let the FBI observe it. They examine, and they still have not examined those servers. They hired this CrowdStrike company, which within one day blamed Russia for hacking the DNC emails, and the evidence they provided is, one, they said a very sophisticated operation had to be by a government, and then the clues were some Cyrillic letters and the fact that they named the first Soviet intelligence chief. So if this was a sophisticated operation, no one would have left behind such ridiculously amateurish clues. So then it turns out that Voice of America actually published an article on March 23 of this year in which it said that the software that CrowdStrike used to make that determination was found to have been wrongly accused the Russians of hacking howitzers on the battlefield in eastern Ukraine, and that was denied by the Ukrainian military itself. They said they were never hacked. So the next day, on March 24th, CrowdStrike had to rewrite the software that they used to determine that Russia had hacked the DNC. That's the first bit of shaky evidence that the entire Russiagate allegation is based on, and again paid for by the DNC. The second one are these Steele memos, which were paid for by the DNC, and we learned from the Washington Post about 2 weeks ago, a mainstream source if there is one, that the Hillary Clinton campaign also with the DNC paid for this intelligence work. No, it is opposition research. It's important to understand the difference between opposition research in a political campaign, a mudslinging campaign, in which the standards are nowhere near what an intelligence report would be. It would not have to be verified. There could be rumor and innuendo in there. You're looking for dirt to throw it. And both parties have done this. This is long-standing, so we know this. The reason that Steele was hired, the New York Times reports, is because from the very outset, the Clinton campaign wanted to tie Trump to Russia. That was the aim, to send him into Russia, because he was the Russia expert for the MI6, to somehow tie Trump to Russia. If you recall, this is a long-standing, time-honored tactic in political campaigns in the United States. If you recall, George H.W. Bush attacked Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton's husband, in the 1990 campaign for having spent a week on holiday in Moscow as a student. So here they're trying to tie Trump to Russia. And what does Steele do? He ties Trump to Russia. He does not go to Russia. He's not allowed back in there, but he talked to various sources, all unnamed, in which he says, of course, that the Russians intelligence had gotten all this dirt on Trump and that they could blackmail him. And it also says in there, this is the first instance of this before the CrowdStrike investigation, that Russia had hacked the emails. So this was a couple of months before CrowdStrike even did that investigation. And Steele quotes a source E, someone, an ethnic Russian close to Trump, supposedly, who is saying this. And how would he know that? Why, if this were a Russian operation, would he need to know? And no one in the Trump administration, in the Trump campaign, needed to know that this was happening. So that link there is very specious, I have to say. So the two sources, the CrowdStrike and the Steele memo, were paid for by the Democrats and are both very, very shaky in terms of. Now, don't forget, the CIA and FBI did not believe, verify this Steele memo. They did, and nor did the corporate media, to their credit. The Clinton campaign was shopping it around in the summer of 2016 and in the fall, and they didn't publish any articles from it as well because they could not confirm this. They saw it as a police of political research, not an intelligence report being vetted. So, and even Clapper and Comey both said in testimony that they weren't able to vet it, but they both admitted that they used this as the basis, at least partly, for the January 6th intelligence assessment by three intelligence agencies. This is key. So the intelligence agency report, the three agencies that the Democrats and all people who believe in the Russiagate story point to is that intelligence assessment, January 6th, not by all 17 agencies, was not vetted in a national intelligence estimate, but it was based on the Steele memo for the most part, and that is critical to understanding. That's a very critical point I made in the article, that we have to understand it was paid for by the Democrats, and that became the basis then for an intelligence report or assessment
And then you have what could be the real scandal, which has not broken yet, and nobody is really writing about it. You see some whisperings about it, but this Steele dossier, which, as you point out, has never been verified, very sketchy. We don't know whether Steele paid his Russian contacts to make up dirt. We don't know anything about the origins of the information. But this dodgy dossier was then, as you report and as I've seen elsewhere, was taken to the FBI as a basis for which a FISA warrant was issued to start monitoring and spying on Trump campaign people. And then you had Rice and the others unmasking these people to get their names. So I think this is really the smoking gun that hasn't blown up yet.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That was used for the FISA warrants that were gotten. And that is, again, based on opposition research, not an intelligence report. And this is very troubling. I have to point out to your audience, I am not a partisan at all, because I really can't stand either party. I don't either represent my interests or millions of Americans' interests. So I am not at all a fan of Donald Trump's, I can assure you. But if you look dispassionately at the facts that have come out now about who paid for this, what exactly was contained in these two reports by CrowdStrike and Steele, you have to question what is really underpinning this entire allegation. Now, they're separate from this. There may be financial crimes. Manafort was indicted for it. Maybe they find that Trump was involved in some money laundering with Russian gangs, all that. That's quite possible. That Mueller may come up with that, but this is not about Russia attacking the DNC and Podesta. That has not been proven yet at all, but it's taken as an article of faith by Democratic partisans. And if you challenge that faith, that they act as a zealot, that they will not be open to any facts that question what they believe in. And I think this is what's happened at the Huffington Post. Until they tell me what I got wrong, I think it's only that they could not accept someone challenging their deep, quasi-religious faith in this story.
Mm-hmm. You know, I've been fascinated with the bigger picture of the anti-Russia sentiment, which is shared by both parties, as you say. But I've often said that we don't need to pick between two parties. They said, people ask me, should we have a third party? And I was thinking that maybe it would help if we had a second party. But the way I see this is this, started out as anti-Russia. It was Republicans started, and they go after Trump. And then when they realize Trump isn't going to win, they shifted over, and Hillary's quickly grabs hold of this. And as you pointed out so clearly, is that this is political. This is the way it's been done in the old Cold War and done in this Cold War. And they continue to do this. But the anti-Russian sentiment is something on date-wise, when you think about it, it's hardly a Republican when you think about what Obama did in 2014 with the coup in Ukraine, as well as going after Assad. And then quickly it goes over to a Democratic thing, and Hillary grabs this up again. And it's anti-Russia is what it is. It was easy to go after Trump early on by Republicans because he was sort of pro-Russia. But it also goes to show that a statement that I made that got a little bit of attention during the campaign. I said, the truth is, Hillary could run in either party, because she fits into the mold of the Republicans that hate Trump, that are the hawks, and they're out there and they want this sentiment. Unfortunately, we don't have enough people like you doing some writing and trying to make it a little bit more balanced about what's going on here. But I think it's very clearly the sentiment that dominates both parties. It's an anti-Russia sentiment, and it really dominates a lot of our foreign policy.
Well, you're right. The other two parts of the article are, one, the consequences of this Russiagate story. A new McCarthyism. There's a new Cold War. It makes sense there's a new McCarthyism. You've had two lists now, blacklists of news organizations, news websites that have been blasted by the Washington Post from an anonymous source as being Russian agents. And then a couple of weeks ago, we had this group called European Values listing individuals who were called useful idiots for Putin. On that list are David Brock, the head of opposition research for Clinton, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and David Ignatius, maybe the most CIA-friendly columnist there is. Why? Because they appeared on RT. This is the way nonsense this is what this has led to. But more dangerously, as you've alluded to, Dr. Paul, is that the geostrategic tensions have arisen enormously because of this story. And I put in the third part of the story that since the 1990s, it was after the end of the Soviet Union, the United States and Wall Street moved in, made alliances with oligarchs, and acid stripped the whole country, impoverished the population, and enriched people in the West and local oligarchs. It was when Putin came into power that he put an end to that. And I firmly believe there's lots of evidence that we can go into on this show, and I wasn't able to go into too much depth in that article, but I've written about elsewhere, is that the U.S. wants to get back to that time. They want to get back inside Russia to exploit its resources and financial resources as well. But more importantly, they see Russia under Putin as a block to their geostrategic interests in Syria in particular. And that was a very dangerous move that Hillary Clinton wanted to put in a no-fly zone that I get into in the book that you showed earlier, that this was, even after General Dunford testified, that could cause a war with Russia. She still stuck to that position in her last debate with Trump. So she was certainly a hawk, and Republicans did support her. But the United States wants to stop, is troubled by Russia stopping them with Brzezinski. What Brzezinski had written about in his book, Great Game, that to get control of Eurasia, you have to get Ukraine from Russia's control, and that was behind the United States' reason, in my view, to back that coup d'etat in 2014 that you also mentioned earlier. And my book goes into great detail and depth about how German intelligence discovered that there was no Russian invasion. There were not even 40,000 troops on the border, as General Breedlove had said, the head of NATO at the time. So Russia has to be stopped for the American strategic interest to continue. And it's very hard for Americans to understand, I think, that maybe we aren't the good guys all the time, and that America could be an aggressive power, and that Russia is playing defense in Syria to stop jihadists that America has backed there. And again, my book goes into a Defense Intelligence Agency document that shows the U.S. supported the prototype of the group that led to ISIS, and they need to stop them. They needed to get rid of a government in Ukraine that did not want to join the European Union Association Agreement. So this is driving, I think, this entire Russiagate story predates this election by a lot. It's part of the U.S. strategy towards Russia. They wanted to then target Trump with it, with Russia, and they have lost the election. The Democrats did, the establishment did, really, in some ways, and that they are continually going on this path, this Russiagate path, and ignoring the facts as they come out that the Democrats paid for all of this.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, the list of Putin's puppets that came out from this European Values think tank, it also includes Adam Schiff, who's the U.S. representative and most behind the Putin-Trump story, and also Dick Cheney is on the list, too. So I'm happy to report that the Ron Paul Institute is also on both lists, and Dr. Paul is on the list as well. But, you know, it is kind of a perfect storm, returning to the Cold War, because you have this alliance between the U.S. oligarchs, the Wall Street oligarchs. You have the neocons, who are all sitting in think tanks, very well funded. And then you have the military-industrial complex that funds the think tanks, that makes a fortune off of selling weapons overseas and selling fear to everyone. So, and they have it all wrapped up in this propaganda that if you somehow challenge this new narrative that pays so well for them, that you are in the service of a foreign government, you know. And
yes.
It is so chilling. It sounds like it's worse than the height of the Cold War.
Yeah. Joe, we're going to have to finish up here shortly, but before we do, I want to put your book up again, How I Lost by Hillary Clinton, and making the point of the picture, because sometimes the Republicans get painted as being part of the big business and the Democrats are for the poor people. And yet, as you mentioned before, there's not much difference between the two parties, and they are both very deeply involved with Wall Street and the military-industrial complex. So those are major problems. I've always complained that there's too much bipartisanship in Washington, because when it comes to foreign policy, they don't have any serious debates. And that to me, Yeah, and you go ahead and make a closing statement and let the audience know where they can reach you if they would like to.
Yeah, I think Consortium News is the best place for me to read it. I wouldn't suggest a Huffington Post at this point. But, I wanted to make one last point about the bipartisanship. Neither one has ever questioned NATO putting 30,000 troops on the Russian border, the way the German foreign minister at the time did, calling NATO a saber rattler. So I think it's really important to open up one's mind and try to look at a different perspective of what the United States is up to outside the borders of the U.S. and what Russiagate's role in all of this is. And I hope that my writing could help illuminate people on that. Thank you very much for having me on.
Wonderful. And Joe, thank you very much for being with us.
Okay.
And good. I want to thank our viewers today for joining us for this very special interview. And I hope you come back soon to the Ron Paul Liberty Report.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. Now, we find out, all this stuff. The initial FISA warrant was based off of made up, fabricated information. It's always been said if you dig deep enough, you'll find dirt on anybody. And then, you also go back to, the statistic on how many crimes everybody commits a day that they don't even know they commit because of so many laws on the books. And then, of course, we got gray laws. Gray laws being the laws that are written very broadly and can at any time be interpreted in ways to push a political agenda. There are a lot of gray laws. I've talked about Manafort and how he was going to be someone that they were going to pursue to try to break. I said that months ago. What happens? He gets indicted, and they're trying to push him. And they have that, the mole that everybody's calling him, or the rat that everybody's calling him, the one that might have wore a wire. From what I understand, he was very, very small potatoes in the whole campaign, and his ability to have a legitimate information seems less likely. And I've also seen other information that says that that person was basically kind of blown off at multiple points. I don't know what kind of collusion's going on, but I know that there is a witch hunt that started based off of fake information, which makes that FISA warrant really a warrant that's based on false premises. And then to find out that information was paid for by the DNC, I see more of a crime there. You have DNC paying for information to be drawn up to cause an FBI investigation through the BS FISA courts. And all of this stuff just keeps rolling out about the Democrats. But the mainstream media, these celebrity folks, it's all Trump's fault. It's all Trump's fault. I don't like the guy either. But I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to cheer for Hillary. I'm not going to join your bandwagon. Are you effing kidding me? You almost have to be a brain dead person to follow any of these politicians. You could build a damn rocket that could get someone to Mars, but if you're supporting these type of politicians, what credibility do you really have? There's a lot of people that have an intelligence that allows them to have a really gifted skill. Does not make them an intelligent person. And the problem is America's been dumbed down. But I think that's being broken a lot of times later on when people finally get fed up and stop just blindly following people and start looking up things. How do you think the Ron Paul revolution even began? It was because people were not buying the BS. They started looking in, and there was one guy that tend to stay consistent, vote the same way, and well, shoot, 30 years and the same exact message. And I'm not saying just like a message that's very broad. No, he get down to specifics. Ideology. But the left tends to not really care about credibility, legit arguments. They're all based off of emotion. Socialism. The whole idea of socialism is based off of people's emotions. If you have a good heart, you want to see people succeed. You want to see people do good. But if you have a brain, you understand that giving people free stuff is not going to help them. So much that in today's society, I've seen people that have worked hard and, did good, get laid off, go to panhandling, and stay on panhandling because guess what? It's tax free and people just give me shit. There's professional panhandlers. They'll sit there in ragged out clothes. You give them free money, they get back in their, $20,000 car and go back to their, $250,000 and up house. There was one here locally that multiple people were posting, this person got in this car. I don't think they're too poor. They've been spotted throughout the whole, northern part of my state, basically. They go from little town to little town, and just hang outside Walmarts. Why? Oh, because free shit means you can be lazy. People are like, that's not socialism. That is not socialism. No, socialism is even worse. Socialism says that, this person over here working their butt off gets paid as much as that guy over there that does nothing. Or harder jobs get paid the same as easy jobs. The guy sweeping the floors gets paid as much as the guy rebuilding the engine in that car. And guess what? The guy rebuilding the engine in the car says, screw this, I'm going to sweep floors for the same amount. Socialism is really a fallacy. It's something that it sounds good, but in reality, human nature, socialism can never work. Definitely in a governmental way. Once you give a government body the ability to force socialism on a society, what does that become? Oh, communism, or national socialism, or democratic socialism. Oh, we've heard that one before. But it's all the same. What happens when that mechanic doesn't want to rebuild that motor and wants to sweep floors? Well, they still need mechanics. So guess what? Either rebuild that motor or he puts you in a cell and make you rebuild that motor. And if you still don't want to do it, guess what? We'll just put it in your head. Up how quickly socialism turns into communism and all the other fascist, national socialism, democratic socialism. It's all the same. It all ends up in the same place. And now, kind of to touch on that a little bit, an incident that happened with one of our senators, Rand Paul, I'm sure everybody's heard by now, was attacked mowing his lawn. And the last couple of days, the idea that it's over a yard dispute has popped up. There might be something to it, but it's not quite that simple. You know, yard disputes are nothing new. This happens all the time. I've had to deal with it. And most of the time, it's no big deal. But I think there's something a lot deeper to this. And I'll cover this Washington Post article here. This had been updated. It looks like update says, and more weirdness ensues since this post initially went up Monday. The New York Times and others pointed to landscaping as the root cause. The Times cited 3 Kentucky Republicans who said the attack was the result of it. landscaping dispute. Though the details were still sketchy, a friend who visited Paul on Saturday, for example, told the Times that Paul was still unsure why he was attacked. And now Paul's chief strategist, Doug Stafford, is apparently calling the landscaping theory into question, tweeting a link to a Breitbart story that cast doubt on it. Stafford has not elaborated further. And I do have that article up here. I want to cover that real quick. It says, exclusive Rand Paul's neighbors say reports blaming savage assault on landscaping disputes are fake news. Rand Paul's neighbors are calling into question reports suggesting the Kentucky senator's character and libertarianism contributed to one member of their community allegedly attacking him at his home in Bowling Green, Kentucky last week. Police arrested Paul's longtime neighbor, 59-year-old retired Dr. Rennie Boucher, and charged him with fourth-degree assault after he allegedly blindsided the senator, who was reportedly mowing his lawn. In an update Wednesday, Paul tweeted that a final report indicates 6 broken ribs. A new X-ray shows pleural infusion buildup fluid around the lungs. Previous reports stated that Paul suffered 5 broken ribs and lacerations to his lungs. Described as an unfortunate event by Paul, many reports have speculated that this was part of landscaping dispute. Neither Paul nor Butcher have indicated what specifically led to the incident. In a recent USA Today report, the developer of Paul's River Green neighborhood described Butcher as a near-perfect neighbor, but that the libertarian politician is a different story. Jim Skaggs paints a picture of Paul as a libertarian property rights zealot, who was probably the hardest person to encourage to follow the Homeowners Association regulations of anyone out here because he has a strong belief in property rights. Wonder why? Because you have them. The pursuit of happiness was not initially supposed to be the pursuit of happiness. It was supposed to be the pursuit of property. Does anybody know why they changed it? Why Jefferson changed? Oh, and the left would not even probably acknowledge this. But there was a specific reason Jefferson decided to pit pursuit of happiness instead of property. It was slavery. He knew that if he put property in there, that would have been used as an argument for slavery, because most slave owners considered their slaves property. But even though we're supposed to be taught by the left that, Jefferson, he was a slaveholder and a racist guy, and he didn't respect no black person. Actually, he understood the issue of slavery, even though he participated, because he had a conscience and one side of his brain was battling with the other. He knew there was something wrong about it. He knew that, that black person is a man just like I am. All men are created equal. He purposely did that. So yeah, property rights. Yeah, that's a real thing. Quote, there have been disagreements in the past, Skaggs said, over lawn clippings or who should cut down a tree branch when it stretched over a property line. Well, if it stretches over your property line, you cut it down. That's the law. Most places, you can't go on their property and cut that stuff down, but if it's overhanging your property, you could cut a perfect line right across that stuff. Many of Paul's neighbors, however, disagree with these reports. As a friend and neighbor of the Paul family, I've been disturbed by the inaccuracies in numerous media accounts of the assault that occurred on Friday. November 3rd, writes Travis Creed in an email to Breitbart News, the stories of a landscaping dispute or a dispute of any sort between Paul and Butcher are erroneous and unfounded. The reason for Mr. Butcher's bizarre attack is known only to him. Statements to the contrary are irresponsible and unnecessary. This speculation regarding Butcher's motive, Creed says, has led to an unfair characterization of the Pauls in their home. Quote, the Pauls are and always have been great neighbors and friends. They take pride in their property and maintain it accordingly. Rand has enjoyed working on and maintaining his lawn for as long as I have known him. He was attacked on his property for no apparent reason and suffered serious injury. That is the only fact known at this time. The senator and his wife Kelly are great people who would never harm anyone in any way, says Danny Renshaw, another neighbor who says he has lived in the same neighborhood as the Pauls for 17 years. Renshaw is appalled by the attack. This is so wrong for anyone to be blindsided and attacked while mowing their yard. I cannot imagine being in my yard pulling weeds or mowing and being violently attacked by anyone, much less my neighbor, he tells Breitbart News. I can't believe he was out of jail on a $7,500 Saturday morning, Renshaw adds. However, this is not me that was attacked. This was one of the 100 U.S. senators of the United States. What kind of person does that? Expressing the same concern, Alicia Stivers writes, as neighbors and close personal friends of the Pauls for almost a quarter of a century, I have never heard Senator Paul speak an unkind word about anyone, let alone become physically violent, which makes it all the more shocking that a next-door neighbor of many years who has not so much as exchanged an email or spoken word with Rand in several years would race downhill and pummel Rand from behind. The Pauls own a lovely wooded lakeside lot in our small subdivision, Severs continues. In fact, the Pauls' lot looks almost exactly the same today as it did 17 years ago when Dr. Butcher and his ex-wife chose their lot and built their house next door. Between us, my husband and I have served 4 years on the Neighborhood Homeowners Association board, and we are unaware of any conflict or complaints from Dr. Butcher regarding the Pauls. Whatever the reason for this attack on Rand, there is absolutely no justification for Dr. Butcher's behavior, she adds. I am wondering how the media can describe what took place as an altercation. It is an altercation when no words are exchanged and no one person is attacked from behind with no warning. I must check my dictionary. Sean Parker also has served on River Green's Homeowners Association board for several years, describing Mr. and Mrs. Paul as very gracious and friendly. She tells a similar account of the Paul's history with the board. My family has lived here for 6 years now, she says. In all the years I have been on board, we have never had any complaints at all regarding the Pauls. No complaints from other neighbors about the Pauls, nor have the Pauls had complaints against anyone else. I pass by their house every day as my family lives diagonally across the street from them, Parker adds. When we see Rand out riding his bike or Kelly out walking in the beautiful neighborhood we live in, they have always waved or even stopped to say hello. This is a wonderful family and an honor to have Kentucky's state senator living near us. What I find amazing is the fact that he cuts his own grass, writes neighbor Bob Warner. Bob and his wife, Gail, have known the Pauls for 20 years. Our neighborhood is fortunate that the Pauls live here, he tells Breitbart News. They are always engaging during their frequent walks through the neighborhood. Our sons are friends with their sons, and we have been on skiing trips as well as meet with them socially. As a friend, neighbor, and senator, Rand has been first class in every way. And you can read the rest of that at Breitbart, and you can read the rest of that first article that I barely covered at Washington Post. But what seems to be going on is you have one guy that gets all the left media writing about, oh, Rand doesn't fall. It's his libertarianism. That's why. And you've had people like that. I don't know. He's very uneducated, naive guy. What's his name? Nolan Hamilton Nolan, I think is his name. That guy just talks shit all day. Bullshit comes right out of his mouth. But you've had the left media just pushing this one guy. Even though you have probably a dozen neighbors, you know, multiple neighbors that have been on the board, and they're all saying this does not add up. One thing, which this is a theory, just like those were theories, but this is just based on information that has been confirmed before, and that Washington, or it might have been the Reason. Reason has an article. It's titled "Rand Paul Getting Attacked is What's Wrong with Libertarianism." Wait, what? That was by Matt Welsh. But it even pointed out, you know, something that had been confirmed when this attack first happened. The article here was talking about, you know, him having socialist-leaning ideology. Well, when it first happened, there were a few neighbors that said, well, Butcher was definitely a very far left-leaning person. Then we have one guy. Other than that, that basically spread all these rumors about Rand Paul not, you know, being of good character because of his libertarianism, and the left ran with it, despite the facts. Facts saying that one guy out of 12, that's an anomaly. That's not the norm. I almost wonder, you know, if this guy was whispering in that guy's ear, which made him blow the lid, and because of his anger for not getting socialism through, he attacked Rand. But no one will know. Not unless he comes out and says why he did it, and is truthful about it. He could come out and lie about it. Yep, it was the landscaping dispute. Yeah. Still doesn't excuse your behavior. Since we are coming up on hour 2, we'll kind of stick on this Donna Brazile. I'm going to play a clip from Stefan Molyneux. We are definitely not covering this whole clip. It is quite a long clip. You can check out the whole thing at Stefan Molyneux on YouTube. But we'll go ahead and dive into this, and we'll cover this at the other side.
So Donna Brazile is a longtime Democrat Party operative. She actually managed Al Gore's presidential campaign way back in the day, and she's coming out with a book called Hacks, which is illustrative on so many levels. We'll get into some interesting details and some great illumination about what this means about the left and the Democrats in America. So the whole book isn't out yet, but the first chapter is out, and basically she reports that when she was invited to take over the DNC after Debbie Wasserman Schultz was kicked out, largely as a result of suspicion that the DNC was in the bag for Hillary and that the entire nominee process was rigged. So Wasserman Schultz was out, Brazil was invited in, and she found the National Party in almost complete disarray. In part, she says, because these three players, President Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Wasserman Schultz, were, as she quotes, three titanic egos who had, quote, stripped the party to a shell for their own purposes. Now, this is extraordinarily unusual. The left never usually punches left. And so why she's throwing Wasserman Schultz and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama under the bus at the moment, well, I have a few theories which we'll get into. So she gets to be the head of the DNC. First few days on the job, she discovered that the DNC was $2 million in the hole, $2 million in debt, and that the payroll of the DNC was stacked with what she calls hangers-on and sycophants. So Wasserman Schultz kept two consulting firms, each on at a burn rate of $25,000 a month. That was just for the retainer. And one of Obama's pollsters was still pulling home $180,000 a year. Of course, this is in the waning days of Obama's presidency, so what does that matter? What does that matter? Well, why on earth would you poll like crazy? It doesn't make any sense. Of course, the DNC is supposed to swell during an election cycle, and then it's supposed to diminish during the trough between election cycles. I guess that's kind of like the Keynesian theory that the government spends during a recession, but then somehow magically saves during a boom time. And so she found that the burn rate was extraordinary, the debt rate was enormous. And these are, of course, the people who want to run your life, your finances, your children's finances, regulate everything you do, run your country. They can't even run their own organization. So the big reveal in Brazil's book is she talks about how Clinton basically took control of the DNC in August of 2015, before the primaries even began. Well, how? How did she do it? Well, there was a joint fundraising agreement between the party and Clinton's campaign. Now, Brazil says that this deal gave Hillary Clinton effective control over the finances of the DNC, over the strategy of the DNC, and even over staffing decisions. So if you're controlling the finances, the strategy, and the staffing of the DNC, I got to think that gives you just a little bit of an edge over the other candidates, including Sandra's. Now, Brazil writes, she says, this was not a criminal act, but as I saw it, it compromised the party's integrity. You don't say. Now, this is interesting because, what was there, 17 nominees plus Trump for the Republicans and really very few for the Democrats. So I do wonder, people like Elizabeth Warren didn't throw her hat into the ring. I wonder if she knew about this backdoor deal to give Hillary control over the DNC, who, of course, is supposed to be an objective and neutral arbiter to reflect the wishes of the party's constituency over who will become the nominee. I wonder if the paucity of competitors to Hillary had something to do with the knowledge floating around about how Hillary's campaign had got a lockjaw on the hearts, minds, and balls. Well, sorry, that's an insult, the balls of the DNC. A fascinating tidbit, not reported on quite as much as perhaps it could be. Now, Donna Brazile towed the party line regarding the murder of Sethridge. Now, there are some theories floating around, which I don't actually believe are theories, but descriptions, which is that Sethridge, who was a DNC staffer, took DNC information, put it on a USB drive, put it on a thumb drive, and handed it to WikiLeaks. That's my particular opinion. There's no absolute proof, but that's what I believe happened. I think that WikiLeaks has, given some indications, although, to be fair to Julian Assange, he won't break confidence, which is entirely right. but it's not entirely outside the realm of some of their activities. So the fact that Seth Rich was murdered, they called it a robbery gone wrong, and although his cell phone and wallet and money weren't taken. So Donna Brazile was towing the line as, oh, well, it's just a murder gone wrong and nothing untoward. However, in this book, she writes that, she's like this Dostoevsky character. She's like haunted by the murder of Seth Rich, the DNC data staffer. She was haunted by this unsolved murder, and she says it caused her to be afraid for her own life. Now, this, of course, makes, how many clues do we need? This makes absolutely no sense. If it's a robbery gone wrong, just some sort of random event in the middle of the night, what would Donna Brazile have to fear? What on earth would she have to fear? Random robbery gone wrong. So she says she's haunted by the murder of Seth Rich. She fears that her own life is in danger. She installs surveillance cameras in her home out of terror of whoever murdered Seth Rich. When she's in the office, she shuts the window blinds so that snipers can't see her. Either she's genuinely insane, or she has something to be scared of, something to be worried about. She does touch on the issue that, when WikiLeaks put out all of their emails, there was an email which has Brazile, who was, of course, a paid CNN contributor at the time, that she shared questions, potential topics for a town hall that CNN was hosting well ahead of time with the Clinton campaign. Now, she says in the book, well, I don't really recall sending the email, but I can't find it in my own computer archives. But she did eventually publicly admit to sending it. And so there's that. Now, another thing that came up that's interesting, and again, we will expect absolutely no circle back, heaven forbid even apologies from the mainstream media, but Hillary's health issues show up in Donna Brazile's book. There was great concern after she struggled with, what they called pneumonia, and on the 9/11 New York City memorial gathering, she passed out and was thrown like a sack of rotten potatoes into a van. And Donna Brazile was haunted by this and was racked with doubt about whether the party should go forward with this. But of course, it was, 2 months before the election, so it seemed unlikely to be able to change it. But she says, again and again, I thought about Joe Biden. But she also adds, no matter my doubts and my fears about the election and Hillary as a candidate, I could not make good on that threat to replace her. And then she seems to indicate that it's because Hillary, of course, was the female candidate, and therefore it was a step forward in the realm of identity politics, the first female president. So the fact that they didn't replace Hillary, who knows what would have happened at the time, but the fact that they didn't had a lot to do with the addiction to identity politics that has characterized the left for so many generations now, really. So here are some quotes from Brazile's book. She says, my predecessor, Florida Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, had not been the most active chair in fundraising at a time when President Barack Obama's neglect had left the party in significant debt. That's a very, very telling statement. Of course, it's not just the DNC that Barack Obama left in significant debt. It was, in fact, the entire country. As you know, debt ballooned under Barack Obama from $10 trillion to $20 trillion, in other words, from the Republic's founding until Barack Obama. It took that long for America to end up $10 trillion in debt, and then 8 years later that had doubled. Now, of course, some of that is not under his control. It's mandated spending and so on, but some of it sure as hell was. So she goes on to write, as Hillary's campaign gained momentum, she resolved the party's debt and put it on a starvation diet. It had become dependent on her campaign for survival, for which she expected to wield control of its operations. And I love how they're like, when the party is ridiculously overspending and Hillary forces it to cut back, now it's a starvation diet. You know how they say it's austerity when the government can't spend ridiculous amounts more than it's taking in taxes. It's just starvation. You know, like if you're on a diet, you're on the sumo diet of like 8,000 calories a day, and then you go down to 7,000 calories a day, and you're suddenly starving to death. Brazil goes on to write, Debbie was not a good manager. She hadn't been very interested in controlling the party. She let Clinton's headquarters in Brooklyn do as it desired, so she didn't have to inform the party officers how bad the situation was, how much control Brooklyn had, and for how long, was something that I had been trying to uncover for the last few weeks. The Saturday morning after the convention in July, I called Gary Gensler, the chief financial officer of Hillary's campaign. He wasted no words. He told me the Democratic Party was broke and $2 million in debt. What? I screamed. I am an officer of the party, and they've been telling us everything is fine, and they were raising money with no problems. Again, this is astounding. Absolutely astounding. Failing to inform the officers of the DNC how much it was in the hole, how much it was spending. First of all, it's their job to find out, and it's other people's job to tell them. And again, these are the people who want to run the country, who think that they're competent to run a multi-trillion-dollar economy when they can't even run a multi-million-dollar local business. So, yeah, so Brazil is saying, no, the officer, I'm an officer of the party. They've been telling us everything's fine, raising money with no problems. And the guy, right, the chief financial officer of Hillary's campaign, replies and says that wasn't true. Officials, she goes on to say, right, officials from Hillary's campaign had taken a look at the DNC's books. Obama left the party $24 million in debt, $15 million in bank debt, and more than $8 million owed to vendors after the 2012 campaign, and had been paying that off very slowly. Now, if you recall, quick rewind here, if you recall back in the day, one of the charges leveled against Donald Trump was that he didn't pay some vendors at some point. The DNC owed over $8 million to vendors after the 2012 campaign. Again, whatever the left accuses you of, they are doing times a million. So, again, this is just part of the whole part and parcel. She went on to write, Obama's campaign was not scheduled to pay it off until 2016. Hillary for America, the campaign, and the Hillary Victory Fund, its joint fundraising vehicle with the DNC, had taken care of 80% of the remaining debt in 2016, about $10 million, and had placed the party on an allowance. You know, when you've got to go to the Clintons for fiscal austerity, you are not in a financially happy place. And that's amazing. So this is before the first vote had been cast for the nominee. And the Hillary campaign had basically more or less floated $10 million to the agency that's supposed to be impartial. I mean, come on. I mean, however ardent a Democrat you are, that is terrible. That is an abominable compromise of any pretense of objectivity. So Donna goes on to write, on the phone, Gary told me the DNC had needed a $2 million loan, which the campaign had arranged. No, that can't be true, I said. The party cannot take out a loan without the unanimous agreement of all of the officers. Gary, how did they do this without me knowing? I asked. I don't know how Debbie relates to the officers, Gary said. He described the party as fully under the control of Hillary's campaign, which seemed to confirm the suspicions of the Bernie camp. The campaign had the DNC on life support, giving it money every month to meet its basic expenses, while the campaign was using the party as a fundraising clearinghouse. Under FEC law, she writes, an individual can contribute a maximum of $2,700 directly to a presidential campaign. But the limits are much higher for contributions to state parties and a party's national committee. Individuals who had maxed out their $2,700 contribution limit to the campaign could write an additional check for $353,400 to the Hillary Victory Fund. That figure represented $10,000 to each of the 32 states' parties who were part of the Victory Fund agreement. $322,000 and $33,400 to the DNC. The money would be deposited in the states first and transferred to the DNC shortly after that. Money in the battleground states usually stayed in that state, but all other states funneled that money directly to the DNC, which quickly transferred the money to Brooklyn. Wait, I said, that victory fund was supposed to be for whoever was the nominee and the state party races. You're telling me that Hillary has been controlling it since before she got the nomination? Gary said the campaign had to do it or the party would collapse. That was the deal that Robbie struck with Debbie, he explained, referring to the campaign manager, Robbie Mook. It was to sustain the DNC. We sent the party nearly $20 million from September until the convention and more to prepare for the election. Now, can you imagine if the DNC had gone bankrupt during the presidential race? I mean, even prior to the nomination, if the DNC had gone bankrupt, that's a brand-killing moment for anybody with half a brain. Yes, we want to run your economy, we want to run your taxes, we want to run your spending, we want to run the spending of the entire government, but we can't even manage our own DNC. We've gone bankrupt. So, of course, this had to happen. And, of course, it was Hillary's campaign that made it happen. So, Donna Brazile goes on to write, "What's the burn rate, Gary?" I asked. "How much money do we need every month to fund the party?" The burn rate was $3.5 million to $4 million a month, he said. I gasped. I had a pretty good sense of the DNC's operations after having served as interim chair 5 years earlier. Back then, the monthly expenses were half that. What had happened? The party chair usually shrinks the staff between presidential election campaigns, but Debbie had chosen not to do that. She had stuck lots of consultants on the DNC payroll, and Obama's consultants were being financed by the DNC too. Just astounding. And again, entirely predictable. So here's what happened. So Sanders and Clinton both signed these joint fundraising agreements with the DNC. This is way back in 2015. And this created the mechanism by which proceeds were split between the campaigns and the party itself. So, of course, when you're out there campaigning saying, oh, give me fundraising for me, or, if you're Hillary or for Bernie or whatever, well, some of that money, a substantial amount of that money was flowing up to the DNC just to keep it propped up. But, so they both signed these boilerplate to share the fundraising. But Clinton's campaign had a little side deal. And that little side deal gave it this influence that we talked about before over staffing and other decisions made by the DNC during the primary. Now, the sort of side deal that Hillary's campaign had with the DNC had also a stipulation that it only affect preparations for the general election. Other candidates could strike a similar deal if they wanted or negotiated and so on. Now, Clinton allies, in responding to what Donna Brazile has said, oh, no, the same offer was available or made explicitly to all candidates. But only the Clinton campaign decided to take advantage of it. Now, can you imagine? Can you imagine? I mean, this is so illogical. I mean, even for the left. So can you imagine you're a manager in the Sanders campaign and they come to you with this offer and you say no. But you know that other candidates have this offer as well. I mean, it would make no sense, right? So two of the Sanders campaign's former top officials said, oh no, we weren't offered that deal like Clinton's. We didn't know anything about Hillary Clinton's side arrangement with the DNC. Now, some reporters have looked up the joint fundraising agreement that the Sanders team made with the DNC. That was in November 2015. And it really has no indication of this supplemental side deal giving the campaign substantial control over the DNC. So somebody's not telling the truth. And I think I know who it is. Now, if you remember, during the primary election cycle, Sanders and in particular Sanders supporters were really angry at the DNC, because the DNC is supposed to be this like neutral blank arbiter, just count the votes and all that. And Bernie and his supporters were alleging that the DNC was on Hillary's side, that it was tilting the playing field. And of course, it was denied. There's no influence. We are totally neutral. We're just blank arbiters. All we're going to do is judge. We don't get involved. We don't have anyone who's preferential to us or anything like that. And this was actually used against Bernie Sanders, right? So it was considered to be, you're paranoid, you're crazy, you're losing and you're lashing out. Oh, you're crazy for imagining that the DNC has any preference for Hillary Clinton. They're totally neutral. You're disloyal. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're losing and lashing out. Amazing. And again, not wildly unpredictable. So Brazil, I mean, it is an unloading. She's just blasting Obama for trashing the finances of the DNC. She is really throwing Wasserman Schultz's leadership under the bus. And yes, she is in print with intimate and deep and detailed knowledge of the matter, confirming once and for all that absolutely, completely, and totally Hillary Clinton's campaign had the DNC entirely on the short leash, entirely in its pocket, long before Hillary Clinton even became the nominee. Donald Trump kept talking to Bernie supporters. He said, look, the Democratic establishment is kind of rigging the whole nominating process. It's biased for Clinton and against Sanders. Now, maybe he knew more than he was letting on, but it turns out that characterization was even more accurate than he imagined. So in at least what we've read of the book so far, Brazil reveals the scheme that Clinton's campaign used to basically, it's like the mafia. Are you in heavy debt? Do you owe money on payroll in your sporting goods store? Did you run up a substantial gambling debt? Oh, don't worry. We'll lend you the money, and then we're going to own your ass. I mean, the DNC's finances, of course, are still a mess, but the DNC. Well, of course, and the funny thing is, of course, that Clinton needed the sustainability of the DNC in order to get the nomination, because if the DNC had gone bankrupt, then I don't even know what would happen. I can't imagine what. So she needed to prop up the DNC in order to have any possibility of the process moving forward, because even to your average normie voter, the fact that the DNC might have gone bankrupt or completely run out of money in one form or another, that wouldn't have looked very good when it came to presidential electoral cycles. Just would have looked. So she needed that. And so it's like, well, if you've got to fund the place, at least ask for something in return. That's politics. You don't hand away 20% of America's uranium production for, anything less than $145 million in the Clinton Foundation. So, yeah, it's quid pro quo. Scratchbacks, and so on. So, yeah, Brazil reveals how Clinton's campaign, by extending a fiscal lifeline, took control of the party during the primary. And how Brazil places all of this in the timeline is important. So this Victory Fund agreement basically put the DNC under Hillary Clinton's campaign's control months before even the very first primary vote was cast. Now, Hillary Clinton wrote a little book, which my book, let's mention it briefly, why not? The Art of the Argument, outsold for a little while. But, theartoftheargument.com is a great book. You should check it out. But Hillary Clinton wrote a whole book, What Happened? Now, this extraordinary scheme where a fiscal lifeline was dropped to the DNC in order to help them avoid bankruptcy or some other godforsaken financial output in return for giving the Clinton campaign control over just about every time everyone went to the bathroom in the DNC. This extraordinary scheme, I don't think it quite made it into the pages of Hillary Clinton's book, What Happened? I wonder if that might cause people to doubt anything else about that book. Hard to imagine, hard to perceive. Now, there's a little thing as well that just is a little sidebar here. So when she went out to visit the Clinton campaign, she did travel a lot during this, and she went out to visit the Clinton campaign headquarters in various places. And she said, it had a kind of funeral air. It was kind of dismal. It was kind of boring. It was kind of lackluster. And when she was visiting one of these places, so there's this former Democratic congressman named Tony Colho. And he used to ask Brazil a question about a campaign, a political campaign. And he would ask her this question: are the kids having sex? Are they having fun? If not, let's create something to get that going, or otherwise we're not going to win. Go, Corey Feldman. But that's an astonishing, it's just weird to me. If you want to win, people better be banging on the copier. I mean, that's just, it's our selected. It's just crazy stuff. Degenerate. So Donna Brazile says, I didn't sense much fun or having sex in Brooklyn. Now, of course, this question of why they lost, we'll get to in a sec. But I just wanted to mention something while I have your attention, at least I hope, this sort of Russian interference. And I talked about this recently, but Miss Clinton's secret agent, Christopher Steele, was paying good money for this Russian disinformation campaign, this dossier. Right, as Lionel Nation points out, the word dossier is brilliant. Not just like printout or rumor or innuendo or paid disinformation. Dossier. It sounds like it's vetted. It sounds like it's solid. It sounds like it's really rooted in fact. But as far as interference in the election goes, well, I got to think that owning the DNC, when even before the first ballot is cast in the primaries, owning the DNC could conceivably be called or have something to do with influencing the election outcome. And of course, this retired British spy, Chris Steele, was handing out cash for this Russian disinformation dossier. And that seems quite a lot of Russian interference in the election. And, oh, by the way, just in case people are wondering about this, it is actually a crime to pay foreigners for opposition research for a wide variety of reasons. And so there's that. So I just wanted to sort of point this out. And how many people knew about this scheme? I wonder how many people in the DNC knew about it, how many people in the various political campaigns knew about it, and how many reporters might have known about it. So Brazil goes on a little further to say, when the party chooses the nominee, the custom is that the candidate's team starts to exercise more control over the party. If the party has an incumbent candidate, as was the case with Clinton in 1996, that's Bill, of course, or Obama in 2012, this kind of arrangement is seamless because the party already is under the control of the president. When you have an open contest without an incumbent and competitive primaries, the party comes under the candidate's control only after the nominee is certain. So, of course, that makes sense, right? Now, Brazil starts off by saying she had to make the call to Bernie after she found this joint fundraising agreement between Hillary and the DNC, this sort of smoking gun of corruption and collusion, in my view. And it's funny, it's just funny to me, it's interesting and funny how she talks about it. She says, I had to make this call to Bernie. I knew it was going to be difficult. I knew it was going to be emotional. So I lit candles and put on some gospel music. I got a difficult call to make. I better light some candles. It's a male-female thing, I guess. Like I can't imagine, I don't know, Trump or me or anyone saying, I got a difficult call to make. Better put on some incense. That I just thought was kind of an interesting detail. So she writes, I told Bernie I had found Hillary's joint fundraising agreement. I explained that the cancer was that she had exerted this control of the party long before she became its nominee. Had I known this, she says, I never would have accepted the interim chair position, but here we were with only weeks before the election. Bernie, she said, took this stoically. He did not yell or express outrage. I think you misspelled cuckily. I mean, this is the guy who, some BLM protester grabs the microphone and he's like, okay, here you go. Well, and of course he's going to take it stoically. I mean, he kind of has to. Why? Because he's a socialist. And here was the DNC in true socialist fashion, taking the votes that Bernie Sanders had earned and handing it to someone else. Just like socialists, everyone's money. Just like the left wants to do with everyone's money. So, yeah, good. He got a nice taste of socialism. I guess there really wasn't much for him to get upset about. So she goes on to write, instead, he asked me what I thought Hillary's chances were. The polls were unanimous in her winning. But what he wanted to know was my own assessment. Ah, yes, well. So Scott Adams, in his new book, Win Bigly, writes about this, that he, Mike Cernovich, myself, and a bunch of other people, and Coulter, of course, were way early in predicting a Trump victory. And I myself was they can't prove this, I'm just telling you, I was more certain even than I said publicly because I didn't want overconfidence to be the weakness. So, this is way back in the day that summer of 2015, I first predicted it and stayed true to it even through all of the ups and downs and Pussygate and so on. And so it's interesting to me when the polls, and most of the mainstream media gave Hillary, even the night of the election, a 98% chance of winning. And it was not the case, as we well know. So when Bernie asks Donna, well, what do you think Hillary's chances are? I don't know if she publicly said, I don't think she's got as good a chance as everyone thinks. But now, of course, in hindsight, with all the information, she says, I had to be frank with him. I did not trust the polls, I said. I told him I had visited states around the country and I found a lack of enthusiasm for her everywhere. I was concerned about the Obama coalition and about millennials. I urged Bernie to work as hard as he could to bring his supporters into the fold with Hillary and to campaign with all the heart and hope he could muster. Now that's, again, an amazing confession to me. She has just found out how rigged and corrupt the entire process was, driven by Hillary Clinton's campaigns propping up of the DNC financially and with this side deal, sidebar, which I don't think was available to anyone else, at least that's what they say. So she's just found out exactly how corrupt the whole process is. And she's still urging Bernie Sanders to do everything he can to make sure this corrupt witch gains control as leader of the free world. Now that's a team player, to put it as nicely as humanly possible. And now Bernie Sanders has been told just how corrupt the entire process was, and now he's being urged to find it in his heart to make sure that this entirely corrupt politician ends up with control over nuclear codes. Amazing. So she goes on to write, he might find some of her positions too centrist and her coziness with the financial elites distasteful, but he knew, and I knew, that the alternative was a person who would put the very future of the country in peril. I knew he heard me. I knew he agreed with me, but I never in my life had felt so tiny and powerless as I did making that call. And you see, this is what has to happen psychologically with people, with half of America or more, half of the world or more, is that the worse and worse Hillary appears, the worse you have to paint Donald Trump. Of course, right? I mean, he has to be Hitler, because if Hillary is as bad as is revealed, as was revealed all the way back to when she got fired from investigating Nixon, all the way back to Whitewater, all the way back to, everything that went on with her husband and the incredible allegations of rape and settling of sexual harassment claims, and all of the corruption that occurred with the Uranium One scandal and with Benghazi and with this sort of pay for play that was detailed in the Clinton cash book. And all of this stuff, that the worse that Hillary appears, the more corrupt that she is revealed to be, the worse you have to paint Donald Trump in order to get her into power. You have to say, okay, well, better the devil you know, or half devil, but he's total devil, right? So this is what she says. She says, well, I still want to get her into power. And this is, of course, what the media has to do. As more and more stuff is coming out about Hillary Clinton, they have to paint Donald Trump as even worse, because otherwise the alternative is that everyone who supported Hillary Clinton was entirely wrong and in the bag with a corrupt politician versus the people who supported Trump. We're not. So it's just so you understand why he has to be painted with such darkness, with so many dark strokes. So she goes on to say, when I hung up the call to Bernie, I started to cry, not out of guilt, but out of anger. We would go forward. We had to. No, you didn't. Now, call me conspiratorial, call me crazy, call me a cat, but I don't genuinely believe or generally believe that this stuff kind of happens by accident. Now, of course, she wrote the book a while ago. There's galleys, there's proofs, and all this kind of stuff, recorded the audiobook. But I don't believe this stuff entirely comes out of accident, out of nowhere. Now, my question is, of course, she's marketing its genius, because now she's going to sell the book to the Trump supporters. She's going to sell the book to the right, whereas it will cost her some sales on the left, but she'll make up for it enormously by people on the right who will read the book. But it's really quite remarkable, because it is rare for this kind of criticism to occur among leftists. So the fact that Brazil is throwing Obama and Hillary under the bus at the moment is quite remarkable. And it makes me wonder if she knows anything that may be coming down the pipe that she may be implicated in. There's a lot of stuff going on around Hillary at the moment, around the Podestas at the moment. And I wonder if she has some insight or knowledge about what might be coming down the pipeline regarding the Clintons. Is Obama going to get scooped up in the Uranium One investigation, should such occur? Maybe she knows something. Maybe she's trying to distance herself. Maybe, I don't know. But there are some very interesting lessons in this. It always was kind of confusing to me and to a lot of people why Hillary was so inattentive and pretty much lazy when it came to campaigning. I mean, she went forever without doing press conferences. She didn't travel that much. She just didn't seem to be that motivated. And to some degree now we know why. Of course, she wasn't in much danger from Crazy Bernie, right? Because it seems like she had the entire situation under control. So it doesn't look like she was under much stress from Bernie or others. And then, of course, everyone was telling her that she was going to win. All the mainstream media, all the polls, they polled during the day when people who vote Democrat are more likely to be home rather than out at a job. They did highly Democratic. They polled single moms, they polled minority communities, and so on. And I think they kind of tried to make it true by portraying it as true, that her victory was going to happen because they just kept saying she's got it in the back. They were hoping to demoralize the Trump supporters. But of course, this sort of come from behind approach, this comeback, second wind approach, I mean, it only made them stronger. It only made them more committed and more determined. There are some people, when you say, no way, they say, okay. And there are some people, when you say, no way, they're like, oh yeah? Let's find out about that. So it hardened their resolve, and it made the leftists lazy. And of course, the significant bump in votes that comes from the mainstream media, again, she had Hollywood, she had academia, she had the mainstream media, she had the reporters, she had, everyone was on her side. She had the V card, she had, just about everything. And of course she did, overlook the white male. She overlooked the frustrated, the economically crippled, those who couldn't get jobs because of the hyper-regulatory state under Obama. And so she pretty much thought she had it in the bag. And, if there's one thing that cheating does, is it makes you lazy. And leftists have been cheating for a long time. Right? When they took control of the education faculties and they started programming teachers to program kids on leftists, right? To the point where now half of millennials want to live in a socialist country. So they programmed kids. They programmed young adults in universities by taking leftist control of faculties. They imported tens of millions of third world voters who overwhelmingly vote for the left. They destroyed border controls in order to allow a flood of illegal immigrants into America, for which there is significant evidence that millions of them voted for the left under the last presidential election. And, of course, they took a lot of foreign money and they concocted, in general, this very concept of postmodernism, so that if you found rational arguments against the left, they could say, reason! Who cares about the reason? It is just a fantasy, eh? Sorry, you've got to have your flower when you say that kind of stuff. So the left has been cheating for a long time, and of course, when you cheat, you get lazy. Of course, you don't train as hard if you know you're going to win the race. It's just the way it works. So, and the other thing too is that when you know you're going to win, you get lazy, and what that means is hardworking people don't want to be around you, right? Because I don't know, like I worked once for the government when I was a temp in my late teens. And I was like a hardworking and focused person, like to get things done. It drove me crazy. It's like, you want to win a running race and you have to run through wet jello or run underwater. It's just, when you want to get things done, these delays drive me crazy. And so what happens is when you get lazy, it rots the entire culture and it acts as a magnet for other lazy people, and it drives out hardworking, competent people, perhaps even into the arms of another candidate. Who knows? I also wanted to drop in because an example of this laziness is this blaming the Russian thing. Right? Rather than figuring out what you did wrong, you blame the Russians. You blame whites. Whatever, right? Anything other than yourself. And so congressional pressure was put on Facebook, right, at a time when Facebook is facing potential antitrust examinations of the kind which completely decimated and crippled IBM for 13 years, I think it was, that they were being ground down by antitrust investigations and potential blowback, and it drove smart people through the Pareto principle. You know, the square root of workers produces half the value, so 100 people out of 10,000 are producing half the value. And who wants to spend their entire life as a high-functioning professional dealing with antitrust investigations? So you leave the company and you go to other companies, which is one of the main reasons why Microsoft ended up vaulting over IBM with the PC. And so Facebook is facing just this kind of soul-draining, potential company-destroying or undermining kind of investigations for antitrust. And so there's a lot of pressure from the government being put on Facebook, and eventually, they said, no, there's no Russian interference. And finally, they got billions of monthly users, and they went through with a fine-tooth comb, and they finally found, 470 potentially suspect accounts that spent $100,000 on ads. About $100,000 on ads. 470 out of billions, and $100,000 out of Facebook's annual revenue of $27 billion. Ooh, catastrophic Russian influence. And the Times described these findings thus: Facebook officials disclosed that they had shut down several hundred accounts that they believe were created by a Russian company linked to the Kremlin and used by $100,000 in ads pushing down divisive issues during and after the American election campaign. Believed. Created by a Russian company linked to the Kremlin. They believe. No. Now, how on earth would Facebook, which does not, to my knowledge, have spies in Russia, how on earth would Facebook know that Russian companies are linked to the Kremlin or not? How do they even know they're Russian companies? How do they know they're Russian users? Ooh, there's Cyrillic in the username. Ooh, there's an IP that originates in Russia. You know that all of the malware that got loose from the CIA, that you can spoof and fake anything you want, saying it comes from this place and it has, it's ridiculous. Come on. It seems to come from a Russian area. It might have a Russian name, and therefore somehow, even if it is someone in Russia, 144 million Russians, all of them are linked to the Kremlin in some manner. Ugh. So, Zuckerberg, again, remember, facing potential antitrust investigation, Zuckerberg says he's expanding this investigation to include, and I quote, additional Russian groups and other former Soviet states. Now, remember, of course, that the entire narrative goes something like this, that Russia wanted Trump to win, therefore. But as it turns out, these Facebook ads were, some of them praised BLM, some of them attacked it. There was no particular consistent pattern of pro-Trump and anti-Hillary. So, it literally is like taking stock advice from the guy screaming into the phone with no connection on the street corner. It has become completely deranged. And these are just people who are striving to wave away or to ward off the extreme discomfort of cognitive dissonance by just making up any imaginary threat that they can. It comes to foreign influence on the U.S. election. I don't know, two countries pop into mind. Saudi Arabia gave a lot of money to the left and has, to some degree, influenced America getting involved in some of the local wars, Yemen in particular. Saudi Arabia, quite a lot of influence. Yes, the elephant in the room, Israel. Big influence on American politics and American elections. If you compare this to these piddly $100,000 worth of ads, that there's absolutely no evidence that they were part of any kind of coordinated Russian campaign. There's no evidence even specifically that they were Russian bought. This is just what people say. Crazy. You got 3,000 ads costing about $100,000 spread over 2 years. this is going to somehow decisively affect a U.S. election when they have contrary positions, no particular consistent position. I mean, you got $100,000 spent on these Facebook ads over 2 years, but in a U.S. presidential election, more than $2 billion is spent on advertising. $2 billion. $100,000 over 2 years. Crazy. I mean, they weren't pro-Trump. They weren't pro-Clinton. They weren't anti-Trump. They weren't anti-Clinton consistently, or not. So, I mean, it's crazy. It's completely mad. So, I hate to say that something might happen to Hillary Clinton legally because, I mean, she's like this superhero. She's like Neo in the Matrix. She blurs. She blurs. Hair stays the same, but she blurs. You know, is the FBI doing something about the Clinton Foundation and some of the significant legal problems involved in that? We'll see. Is something coming down about Uranium One? Is there going to be an investigation? Have the emails, are they going to surface? I mean, who knows? Who knows? So maybe this has something to do with this. Now, here is one of the big challenges as well. The mainstream media is really not going to talk about this Brazil story. And one of the reasons that they don't, obviously there's, partisan loyalties and so on. One of the reasons they don't want to tell you about this Clinton corruption of the DNC and the DNC corruption in itself is because they want to keep this information as far away from their viewership as humanly possible, so that if Hillary Clinton ends up being indicted, then there will be such a shock to the system of the mainstream media viewers that they will likely react hysterically and potentially violently. Well, most likely violent. And, like I was traveling yesterday. I was coming back from working on Mike Cernovich's upcoming film called Host, which you should definitely check out. Not just my part, but I hear it's going to be great. So thanks for including me, Mike. It was a great honor. But I was traveling November 4th, 2017. It's supposed to be this big day of Antifa riots. And Antifa as a brand is dead. They've been too violent, too weird. And they've been rebranded as violent losers, which you can't survive. I mean, because of alternative media, social media, they have been rebranded in a way that, in Germany, Antifa is very dangerous because there's so much control over social media that they can't get rebranded as what they are, which is basement-dwelling, violent, dysfunctional losers. And so this violence that they want, the more information is withheld from you, then if, it was Russia who hacked the election, and if Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, which I guess she did if you discount the illegals voting or other corruptions, but of course, that's like saying I won the tennis game because I swung more. It's like that's not how you win the tennis game, winning the popular vote. Donald Trump wasn't trying to win the popular vote. He was trying to win the electoral college vote because he's got a very high IQ, and that's how you win. I won the chess game.
Okay, we're going to stop it right there. Now, we covered a lot of stuff in this, but when you look at the breakdown of mainstream media has pushed the narrative that it's Trump and Russia, Trump and Russia.